The two words to describe the activity. The Yoruba Unity Forum is conducted.
Be the first to know. From the north, south, east, west, and around Africa, we break the news.
Women in Nigeria.
Now you can catch all the actions live as the news breaks. We are Core TV News.
Welcome to Core TV Primetime
Our
News.
24-hour news station.
Thanks for staying with us on Core Digest Monday, and it looks like you're going to be my guest on the show today. So I'm going to open the phone lines just like in a split seconds, and of course the Twitter handle is at Core Digest Live, and you're going to be my resource persons as we find out what are those political events that actually define 2014 for us as a year and as a country rather. Let's kickstart with some quite interesting topics. No doubt 2014 was much talked to be a pre-election year and you expect lots of political activities. But beyond that, apart from the 2015 fever that rocked this year as Nigerian politicians are jostled together to ensure that the clouds are clear for them to run. 2014 also is very interesting for Nigeria historically and politically. Of course, our democracy might just be 16 years old, our independence a little bit above 5 decades. But on the first day of January 2014, Nigeria politically and historically marked 100 years of centenary. Of course, the amalgamation of the Northern and the Southern Protectorate sometimes in 1914, if I am right. And that, of course, categorized and characterized some of those things that happened this year. You'll recall the Centenary Award, one of which has been celebrated to be quite laudable because we saw ordinary Nigerians being awarded. We saw taxi drivers being awarded. Of course, we saw people who have really contributed in their own little or magnificent way. We also saw the designer of the Nigerian flag being awarded at that particular ceremony. Quite a number of other things also came on board the Centenary City. We showed you that earlier in some of our bulletins, which would take about 10 years to build, and it's really going to be beautiful. It will seem as if we have Dubai in Nigeria. The new 100 Naira centenary note is also out in commemoration of Nigeria's 100 years. But beyond all the celebration and all the paparazzi that rocked the centenary in Nigeria, the bottom line for most Nigerians are the questions of whether Nigeria is truly as united as it used to be. And of course, there are also questions of what the future is really like for Nigeria in the midst of all the security challenges and economic challenges, so to speak. So how much work can the new centenary note of 100 Naira do to unite Nigerians? How much hope will it bring to concerned and, of course, average Nigerians who are hopeful that indeed one day will come that they too will enjoy being called Nigerians? Of course, one of the fallouts would be the convening of the much talked about national conference. You recall that, where about over 400 delegates across border Nigeria, across political borders, across religious borders, came together as a result of finding out which way forward to determine the basis of our existence as a country. And this eventually took off on Monday, March 17, 2014. There's been much talk, of course. You recall the initial reaction coming from the opposition party asking how much money would be spent on the national conference, talking about why such a dialogue is coming just few months or just in a few moments to the general election in 2015. The APC rejected it completely, describing it as diversionary. But President Jonathan's plan turned in the decisions of the conference to the National Assembly. His intention, rather, to turn that conference result to the National Assembly also generated some heat. President Billy Jonathan declared this particular convention open at the Justice Andres Otutu Obaseki Auditorium at the National Judicial Institute in Abuja. The National Confab was chaired by retired Justice Idris Kutigi and Professor Bolaji Akiyemi as vice, and was supposed to last 3 months, but did not submit its report not until Thursday, August 21, 2014. The exercise, which gulped more than its earlier 7 billion naira estimate, may remain another jamboree with nothing to show for it. But on the other side of the coin, Mr. President is very, very hopeful that results and, of course, the resolutions of these about 494 delegates that participate in the national conference will be dealt with appropriately. Issues like autonomy of local government. You recall that in a swift reaction to all of this too, the National Assembly seemed to have woken up to its responsibility in the bid of amending the Constitution, and that is ongoing as we speak. Many have even said legally the National Assembly legally has that responsibility of amending constitution. There were also other issues as regards whether this should be a draft constitution, a totally new one, apart from the 1999 constitution. Ultimately, it ended up being a draft amendment to the 1999 constitution. So when you put all of these side by sides with the works going on at the National Assembly, and you begin to ask yourself questions if indeed what was done at the National Conference will eventually supersede what's being done now at the National Assembly. Recently, the 36 states houses of assembly across the nation struck out independence for what it's been described as the local government autonomy, and that is against the resolution of the National Conference. Other interesting issues creeping up. Of course, about 4 or 5 delegates unfortunately died during this conference. One of them was the former NAFDAC boss, known for her no doubt passion and leadership qualities that she was able to show while she was alive and hale and hearty in Nigeria. Quite sad that many of these veterans lost their lives in service to nationhood. Beyond all of that, the big question remains that will all those jobs done, would they eventually impact on the polity and the governance of Nigeria? There were very, very controversial issues that were debated. There were issues of the tenure elongation for politicians elected into various offices. There were issues of probably removing or leaving the immunity clause, so to speak. However, the conference started on a shaky note, but the series of meetings, the conference, the Confab chairman Idris Kutigi and with other zonal leaders in the course of the exercise seemed to pay off as the delegates agreed on the position on the controversial draft constitution. So that's the way it is now, and we are still hopeful that issues that came up as a result of the national conference will be dealt with judiciously, and that eventually and subsequently it will impact, no doubt, on what is being done in Nigeria. Don't forget that you can be a part of all of this review by sending in your comment on our Twitter handle at Core Digest Live. And you can also call in and let's have your perception of how the Nigerian politics fared in 2014. Now let's move away from centenary and national conference and find out other interesting political events that rocked this year. We'll kickstart with the People's Democratic Party. You recall that there were rancor as regards the position of the former national chairman of the PDP, Dr. Bamanga Tuko, the disparity and the disagreements that transpired between him and some PDP governors. Well, the fireworks, political fireworks with the resignation of the national chairman of the PDP on 15 January 2014, no doubt kickstarted another very interesting political debate within the big party, the PDP. The lead over the Simri face-off between Tuko and the PDP governors blew off, resulting in what was later reported as a forced resignation by Tuko, who had earlier on declared that he would not resign because only the party's convention could remove him. However, the party on January 20 settled for Dr. Adamu Muazu, former governor of Bauchi State, as national chairman of the party, and the party's National Executive Committee, the neck, so to speak, the second most powerful organ of the party, adopted Muazu pending the ratification of the National Convention. The latest National Convention, which was held last month, which also featured the endorsement and ratification of Mr. President as the presidential candidate of PDP in 2015, of course, saw this man on your screen being also ratified. But 6 months later, after all of this happened, the former governor of Edo State, Chief John Odige Oyegun, of course, on the other side of the coin, also emerged as the national chairman of the APC on 14th of June, having marched last year. Of course, the APC in June assembled delegates at its first national convention in Abuja and elected Oyegun by consensus. Of course, there were several initial stiff opposition from his kinsman Tom Ikime, who also slugged it out in that particular election. Tom Ikime did not even appear at all at the venue of the convention, and that kick-started another sort of challenge for the opposition, the APC, which literally subsequently blew right into the face of the opposition, with that statesman decamping from the APC. I want to believe he actually joined the People's Democratic Party later on. Two other aspirants also of the chairmanship position, Chief Sam Jaja and Timi Presiva, agreed to back down, thus leaving Oyegun and Ikime to contest. Ikime later came out with about 8-page letter thereabout, giving his reasons for leaving the APC and all of the injustice he allegedly suffered in the hands of the APC stakeholders, and saying that indeed must be the reason and is good enough for him to leave the APC right now. No doubt a big addition to the big party, the People's Democratic Party, and that seemed to have kick-started the list of endless decamping and defection that took place earlier this year. Defection are still ongoing. No one can tell it might even continue today, tomorrow, even before the end of the year on Wednesday. But quite interestingly, numbers of defection that took place today earlier this year. From Tom Ikime, it went on and on from PDP to the APC and APC backwards. Of course, not long afterwards, another former chieftain of the APC, a former governor of Borno State, Adlimodu Sheriff, also moved to the People's Democratic Party, citing irreconcilable differences with the APC. And you recall that he had been in the opposition to the PDP for most part of the political journey since 1999. And of course, some big wigs, no doubt, leaving the APC earlier this year. You also recall that not quite long after that, Alimodu Sheriff also became the subject of controversial debate as regards his affiliation, his alleged affiliation with the Boko Haram sect. And there were also pictures coming up later with him having a meeting with Mr. President. Mr. President came up later to say, no, it was not a meeting. We met at an airport facility and, you know, in Niger or so. And as a Nigerian, he came to greet me, and it goes on and on like that. Another important defection that might be worth mentioning is also that of the former governor of Sokoto State, Alhaji Attahiru Bafarawa, who also left the APC, moving to the People's Democratic Party. And APC seemed to be the early casualty of the list of endless defections that took place in 2014. He also cited a demand by his supporters to do so, having been relegated upon the defection of the incumbent governor Aliyu Wamako from the PDP to the APC. Now, another person that defected would be the former Kano State Governor Ibrahim Shekarau, a staunch opposition figure prior to this time in the state, an integral member of the APC merger. He also defected to the PDP, noting the legacy group sacrificed all of the interest for the merger, but for, he says, and I quote him now, but for the 6 months all agreements reached have not been met. Well, I really don't know what agreements were met, but indeed he left that party for the People's Democratic Party. Now, another quite interesting defection that took place would be that of the former governor of Anambra State, Peter Obi, from APGA to the People's Democratic Party. Of course, it was quite a gentleman about it. He finished his tenure, I believe his 8 years tenure with the All Progressives Grand Alliance before he took a bow and left his leadership of the party in that state and decamped to the People's Democratic Party. That is now being described as a not too fine political move, so to speak, because many are of the opinion that it might just be moving into political obscurity. Well, no one can tell yet. Just a day after he decamped, of course, there was a federal appointment for him, but many were of the opinion that he had built so much political structure and he could have just stood back a little bit to find out much more things he could have done with that party. Of course, he parted ways with APGA, joined the PDP, and that also led to other series of defection in that part of the country. But let's come a little bit to the southwest. The Olusegun Mimiko also did something quite interesting earlier this year when he decamped from the Labour Party to the People's Democratic Party. This expectedly sparked up some rumbles and eventual settlements in that part of the country. This is exactly how we went about it.
That I, Dr. Olusegun Mimiko, following extensive consultation across the land, today formally announced the decision of members of the National Assembly of Labour Party in Ondo State, members of Labour Party in the Ondo State House of Assembly, members of Labour Party in State Executive Council, indeed all of our members in Ondo State and those who share our aspirations to join the People's Democratic Party. Diroko Kabo. PDP. Power. PDP. Power. PDP Joe. PDP Joe.
All right, no doubt that kick-started lots of controversies in Ondo State. Of course, lots of division within its defunct party, the Labour Party. The state chairman was also indicted. There were different conventions taking place. Of course, much expectedly, members of the State House of Assembly also followed in with other political chieftains in that state. And the big question now is what happens to the Labour Party after it has lost one of its strongest strongholds. Earlier this year, we also had one of their national publicity secretaries who joined us from Lagos. There was another one who joined us from Abuja, and they gave us different point of views as regards the way forward for the Labour Party. There are talks as regards much involvement of Labour movements like NLC and TUC now in the Labour Party. Some are saying they are not ready to field presidential candidates, not even any candidates for now, that they need to rebuild the party and ensure that the laborers really, or members of the labor unions in Nigeria, are well engrafted and involved in this particular party. How all of that will go, only time will tell. But Mimiko defected. Nothing happened. Another person that defected also, not for the first time really, because he has been jumping parties for a while now, is the former vice president of Nigeria, Atiku Abubakar, who also formally resigned from the People's Democratic Party and joined the APC, having frolicked with the leadership of the opposition party after he saw that his political ambitions could not be achieved in the PDP. Used to be with the ACN. You'll recall that I believe he vied for presidential election under the platform of the Action Congress of Nigeria at the time. He left that and went to the PDP. Used to be with the PDP PDM, and of course it went back to the APC. And the good news is that even after the National Convention, we're going to get there, he's still sticking around with the All Progressives Congress at this time. One of the biggest defection yet to take place in Nigeria in 2014. I don't know, tomorrow maybe I'll be defecting and that makes it bigger. But then, of course, there are bigger defections that are still being awaited. But one of the biggest would be the Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, the man that has been described as the number 4 person of the country, Right Honorable Aminu Waziri Tamboa. And this is exactly the language he used, and many have called it not only dramatic, not only diplomatic, but one of the most talked about ways to decamp from one party to the other in political history. Get to find out how he went about it, but he actually said that he was declaring his membership of the All Progressives Congress. That indeed has become a matter, a subject matter of discussion. It has beclouded public discourse, public debate, month in, month out, day after day. And of course, it also brought to light that section of the Constitution. I believe it's section 16, section 2, subsection 16. I'm not good with numbers now, but of course, that has to do about what happens to a politician when he leaves a party, a platform from which he was elected, to another party while in office. Unlike every other defection that took place earlier, you recall that there were a number of them that I read. We talked about the Olusegun Mimiko. That did not raise dust. But in the moment the Speaker of the House defected from the PDP to the APC, we started talking about Constitution. We started talking about the legal rights. And of course, we started seeing lots of drama taking place. He said he was announcing his membership of the APC. He really didn't say he was defected. So we now began to find out the clauses within that Constitution that talked about if indeed there was a crisis, if indeed there was what they calling them, a faction. And you recall that there was actually a faction, the Baraja faction last year. So there were issues whether indeed the Right Honorable Speaker had already left the party at that particular time. Many have even described him an APC man in the house who was just wearing the PDP Babariga. But that has been described as the mother of all defections, as he abandoned the PDP for the APC, which left in Australia a heated debate over whether or not he should fulfill the seat as stated in the Constitution. Now, there have been many attempts to remove him from that position. Immediately when he was done with that, he closed the house to reconvene later, I believe in December. But another issue came up which had to do with a possible extension of the emergency rule in 3 northeastern states. And of course, Mr. President wrote both houses of the National Assembly, and of course the Speaker had to reconvene the House. But that did not happen peacefully, so to speak. We also saw one of the greatest political dramas yet that has happened in Nigeria, where the police laid a siege on the National Assembly. There were allegations of the Speaker being tear-gassed. There were allegations also of police harassing members of the National Assembly. We saw the reaction from the president, what's it called now, the leader of the Senate, also the Senate leader, and several other lawmakers laying claim and having one thing or the other to say as regards the controversial nature of the security forces and their the role they had to play in all of those things that happened. Apart from the police tear-gassing lawmakers, we also saw lawmakers scaling fences, actually scaling fences. And then we also there were also issues as regards whether that was the right thing really for them to do. This indeed has different versions of stories, and different people seem to have varied number of perceptions and contribution as regards it. But let's find out how it actually happened earlier this year.
What is happening? Are you three citizens of this country?
All right, finding out much more things that happened, the dramatic entrance of lawmakers who forced their way through into the complex of the National Assembly. They were of the opinion that there were plans by the PDP to impeach the Speaker that very day, and they needed to be there, rally around him. Well, the Speaker managed to enter into the floor throughout the proposed extension of emergency rule in these three northeastern states, and there were also aggrieved members of the House who also signed a petition against Mr. President, and that was where the rumors of impeaching Mr. President actually kick-started from, with several number of signatories. Of course, you also would recall that the entrance of the Senate President into the hallowed chamber of the House of Representatives also kick-started another debate. If David Mark had the right to enter the chambers, what he was doing there? Of course, he entered to safeguard the life of the Speaker, especially exactly what he had to say. You recall that he walked into the chamber and ushered the Speaker of the House out, condemning what the security forces actually did. Now, away from there also, there were many other developing stories from that issue that arose earlier this year. There was also a particular committee set up by the House of Representatives where the Inspector General of Police was summoned to come say and give his opinion as regards what happened. You recall that the Inspector General of Police was unable to accord Alhaji Aminu Waziri Tambuwa the name Speaker of the House. And that also kick-started another debate where members of the House said they could not sit down there and watch him not being able to recognize Aminu Tambuwa as the Speaker of the House. So they all walked out, and that particular meeting ended up in a deadlock. There were also legal issues. If the House of Reps can be a judge in their own case, organizing a committee to talk about this issue, there were other people in the other device that were questioning the authority of the IGP not to be able to name Aminu Tambuwa as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Tambuwa survived tear gas, survived invasion of the National Assembly by police force. Of course, there were also legal parties that arose. It seemed to be surviving, and there are also many other issues, but the bottom line is that as at today, Aminu Tambuwa still remains the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Let's see what happens before February or March when his tenure will actually elapse. He also picked the governorship ticket in his home state under the platform of the All Progressives Congress. Prior to that time, there were issues as regards whether he was going to run for presidency. You recall that certain number of his colleagues went to the APC Secretariat in Abuja, where they actually collected the presidential form on his behalf to run. But there were behind closed door talks, as it's been said in the media, that they had to tell him not to tamper with the mathematical calculations of the APC in that effect. Don't forget that you can also drop in your comments on our Twitter handle. It's at Call Digest Live, where we'll get to hear from you and find out what you have to say about what has happened in Nigeria politically in the course of the year 2014. And we're right now with the developments from the National Assembly. Can we just have that clips as a silent film, MCR, while I quickly find out some tweets, check out some tweets here from our Twitter handle. Is at Core Digest Live, and we'll find out what your comments are and what your contribution would be this morning. Don't forget that the phone line is also on, where you can participate. But this is exactly what transpired when the House of Reps committee member met with the Inspector General of Police.
observed, we read that having received intelligence reports, that was informed the decision of the police to be present in our premises that very day.
The State Security Service. Not only that, some of the principal officers or staff of the principal officers called me directly to confirm what was behind the strengthening of the security of the National Assembly that night. That is to say, the night of 19th November. And I told them that it is based on credible information that there was the plan to disrupt the security of the National Assembly. And bearing in mind what happened to the parliament in Burkina Faso on 30th of October 2014, that security was strengthened, and it included ensuring that the operational procedures of the security of the National Assembly was complied with. That was why the issue of ensuring that members identified themselves was taken into consideration, and arrangements were made so that members will identify themselves and be screened as provided in the procedures. And that went on, and some of the principal officers of the National Assembly complied, and that went on until when that was disrupted on the arrival of Alhaji Aminu Tambuwal at the gate, first gate, where all arrangements on the arrival of Alhaji Aminu Tambuwal.
I expect you to acknowledge Alhaji Aminu Waziri Tambuwal as the Speaker of this House, pending the interpretation of a judiciary which is saddled by the Constitution of this country, for or otherwise.
I will not sit down and allow an appointee of another arm of government to disrespect the status and the office of the Mr. Speaker of the National Assembly. It's either the IGP is retracting that statement now, or I, as an individual, will have to take my leave, because that means this sitting is illegal.
You know too well, matters before the court are not commented upon. I believe it will be sub judice for me to comment on a matter that is before the court. Thank you.
So it was between legislators and law enforcement agencies earlier this year, finding out the bottom line of the issues. And why is it that these two parties were at loggerheads? There were initial insinuations that the police have now become the law enforcement agencies for the executives. That has always been the position of the opposition. There were questions as regards why didn't Mr. President say anything as regards this? The position of the presidency seemed to have have upheld the actions of the Nigerian police. And up to today, all of these issues are still in court. I think I must have missed out something that happened around June. On Sunday, June 8, 2014, as a matter of fact, Alhaji Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, of course, you recall earlier also he was sacked from being the central bank or governor of Nigeria because of his claims and his insinuations as regards certain billions of dollars were stolen. There were issues that he was not consistent with his claims. There was a fallout with the presidency, raising alarm over missing funds from the oil revenue. Of course, on that particular day, he also was named the 57th Emir of Kano by the State Secretary to the government, Dr. Rabiu Sulaiman. The issue of his election or his coronation, so to speak, as Emir of Kano also was greeted with lots of controversies. As a matter of fact, his announcement was greeted with some sort of rioting in that particular area where certain people protested his coronation, saying that there were other people who had better legal claim to the throne. Well, the circumstances surrounding his ascension clouded in an intense political atmosphere. Sanusi's appointment, which was formally announced by the chamber of the Kano, was announced rather at the chambers of the Kano government house by secretary to the state government. There were also political intonations and all of that, given his very, very strong personality and his ability to come out to speak against the federal government. Some were the opinion that the federal government wouldn't want him in charge of affairs in that particular part of the world, part of the country, given the number of eligible voters that Kano has, that is running into some 4 or more millions of voters, and how all of that would match up in the forthcoming general elections in 2015. Well, Lamido Sanusi, of course, coronated as Emir of Kano. Sometimes earlier also certain very sad incidents happened where he was in a particular mosque in Kano where he told the people that it might just be time to start taking up arms against the Boko Haram. You call that few days after that, that particular mosque was bombed with scores of Nigerians dead in that dastardly act. And of course, we also saw a new video coming from the Boko Haram sect threatening Sanusi's life in that particular video and claiming that he is not a good Muslim. A lot of things also happened in that light. But let's quickly touch on the elections that took place in this year. About 2 critical ones, and we kickstart from the one that happened in Ekiti. It was a shocker for the All Progressives Congress in Ekiti when the incumbent governor, Kayode Fayemi, could not win a re-election bid on June 22, 2014. It was a Sunday, and that marked another political landmark in the history of the country. Against all odds, the man that was impeached some times ago, Ayodele Fayose, defeated the incumbent, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, and he was only able to garner, Kayode Fayemi was only able to garner 120,433 votes on that list of score sheets, and then of course with his other opponent Ayodele Fayose having a whopping 203,090 votes. Now it was a result that took many political pundits by surprise. Prior to that time, nobody saw it coming. Of course, the incumbent governor right now, Ayodele Fayose, was speaking bold and talking about how divine and how divine and intentional it is for him to be inaugurated again. Now, given also these peculiar circumstances that surrounded that election, the man on your screen is Shegoni, a former governor of Ekiti State. There was Adebayo, Badeni Adebayo Ebato, that 3 former governors who also were with the APC during that election. Shegoni actually defected from the PDP to the APC during that election. It was a case of about 3 or so governors joining forces together, and that is one of the major highlights of Fayoshe's victory when he came up to say that he did not only defeat Kayode Fayemi, he defeated about 3 Ekiti state governors all put together. There's been much talk now as regards his politics of stomach infrastructure. We saw a lot of Fayoshe rice and several other gift items he gave out, but it looked as if the Ekiti people actually spoke with their votes during the election. There were counter claims by the APC, however, but if you look at a display of all of these results, it was a landslide victory for the PDP in that club. Look at Ise and look at the figures. It looks as if the PDP seem to have double or close to double of the figures in most of the local governments where the election held. But then the APC came up to say that there were issues as regards election. You know what characterizes elections in Nigeria, it always end up in the court. As a matter of fact, after outrightly winning this election, a particular group called E11 came up to say that Fayoshe was not eligible to contest. He was impeached and he's still answering certain cases with the AFCC. That also will also remind you of what has now been described as the desecration of the court houses, court of justice in Nigeria, where a judge was allegedly beaten up and then there were riots that stalled ongoing proceedings in the court of law. As a matter of fact, the opposition came out to say that it was becoming evident that somebody was about to lose the case and they had to bring people to court. Well, the bottom line is that that particular case verdict already is out and Fayoshe has been cleared of any fault in that particular election. It looks as if he's sitting well right now as the governor of Ekiti State. Indeed, a political shocker in Nigeria for electorate, as even for the APC, which I believe must have learnt their lessons. Another interesting election that came afterwards, because there were issues that these major 2 elections were going to be litmus test for the much talked about 2015 general elections. It was also on another Sunday, August 10, 2014, that saw the re-election of Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, who must have learnt about his colleagues' defeat in Ekiti. He came up as the governor of Osun State for the 2nd time. Now, Governor Aregbesola defeated his closest rival, Senator Iyola Omishore of the PDP, by 394,684 votes. Omishore had quite close result if you compare with what happened in Ekiti, 292,747 for Omishore. But the remarkable difference would be that there seemed to be more voters' participation in the Osun election than Ekiti. But exactly like the Ekiti own, it's also in court as we speak right now. The amazing part is even that the former governor of the state, Olagunsoye Oyelola, who at a quarter to election in Osun State also joined the APC, is now even one of Aregbesolah's lawyer. There seem to be a lot of interesting figures in the council team of Aregbesola. Of course, the APC vice presidential candidate, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, has also joined force with the APC council team in Osun State. So it looks like a really, really interesting legal battle out there. Another characteristic of the Ekiti election, if I can just quickly go back there, was what is now being celebrated as the spirit of sportsmanship that was displayed by the former Ekiti State governor. Barely 24 hours after the announcement of that result, Kayode Fayemi came out to say that if indeed this is the will of the Ekiti people, then he would support his brother Ayodele Fayoshe, and he summoned him to the state government, the state house, actually, I think 2 or 3 days afterwards, and we saw both of them talking together. I don't know if it was forced smile, but they were smiling together, and then we heard them say they would formulate a joint committee for their handing over ceremony. It looked good. It was the first time in a long time that we saw politicians display that kind of maturity, that kind of dexterity. But trust me, it didn't last, because as we speak right now, these 2 men are on each other's throats every day. There's always something that somebody is saying against the other. If somebody is not saying, they should check him out in the psychiatric hospital. The other person is saying somebody stole money, and then unfortunately we saw a totally different side of what transpired initially at the onset of that election. Well, there's been much talk about the improvement of the Independent National Electoral Commission, especially when you compare these two elections with what transpired earlier in Anambra State. Election materials in some places got there earlier. Logistics problem wasn't much of a challenge, but many have also said that maybe it's not high time for INEC to rejoice, because this time around it was just 2 states. As a matter of fact, these 2 states elections were conducted separately. So INEC had all the paraphernalia, all the personnel, all the hands that they required, all the 36 states forces joining hands together to conduct an election. So that might not just be a good litmus test for the 2015 general elections. Another major issue that also characterized this particular exercise was what is now being described as the militarization of that election. Many have questioned what soldiers were doing on the ground. Many have questioned masked men. But Atahiru Jega is also of the opinion this time around that probably uniformed men should not be used for electioneering processes in the country. So quite exciting for the Ekiti and Osun election, but the big question now is how prepared is INEC for the 2015 election? And that will bring us to the PVC distribution. But I'm just going to take a break, a coffee break, and I'll be back with you. Probably we'll open the phone lines this time. Don't forget that you can call us, endeavor to turn down the volume of your TV set, and let's have your perception as regards how politics has fared thus far in the country. And of course, you can also tweet at us at Core Digest Live. Stick around, don't go away.
You can now watch Core TV News live from anywhere in the world on our website www.coretvnews.com. Click on Live TV on our website and watch us live.
And welcome to Core TV Primetime Days.
To follow us on Twitter, click on Twitter icon on our website. On Facebook, click on the Facebook and YouTube to see all our previous news production. You can also watch us live on YouTube. Click Core TV. Leave a space, then news. Core TV News, a 24-hour news station.